year was the longest, shortest year we've ever had, right? We hope that we don't go through what went through last year, right? But you know what? Do you have students who are still facing the fact that they might not be in the home that they were in last year? Or if they are, it might not be back to normal yet. We still have many people who almost a year later still don't have their houses put back together. Is it important to know that? Is it important to know what they're going through? I have a very dear friend who has lived in Friendswood for 28 years near a creek down there that has never flooded until Harvey. And even though they only got 6 inches in, and then it was pretty much gone the next day, they went through the devastation of people that had 6 feet in, because by the time they could get back into the area, it had soaked up the walls. She has just now been back in her home for about 6 weeks. In visiting with her a couple of weeks ago, the PTSD type syndrome that she's facing. And I had put a lot of blame on her for feeling like our friendship had declined rapidly. But after talking to her that day, I thought, shame on you, on me, for putting some blame on her and not walking in her shoes. What makes them who they are? And maybe the way they act the way they do. And so today, as we go through this restorative piece and building those true relationships, those true foundations with our kiddos, it's a constant thing that we're learning day by day about them that makes them who they are. So we're going to get into that too.
And this year, we have to change that. We have to make that first impression of when those parents come through the door, or call, or email, or send smoke signals, or whatever they do. That first impression has to be one of love. That first impression has to be one of welcoming them in and making them feel comfortable. One thing we didn't mention in the beginning is our schools, our district, is a mirror image of our society. No matter how you see it, it's a mirror image. What happens out there does happen here. Do we have some teachers who truly don't care and are here for a paycheck? Absolutely. Do we have people here who will be biased and will racially profile our students? Yes, we do. Do we have those teachers who come here every day and give their absolute most? Yes, we do. This is a hard and big ship to turn. But we are working every single day to turn it around. It starts here. It starts with us being reflective of who we are and what we're doing. I'm going to say this all throughout the day. We don't just teach our kids curriculum. We teach our kids life. You're teaching social skills every single day. You go throughout the lessons and you're like, oh, Jimmy, make sure, clean up after yourself, say thank you, say please. We do all that. When they don't get it academically, we do push-ins, pull-outs, tutorials, Saturday school. I send you home with manipulatives. I send you home with websites to go to. I do all of that because I want to see you successfully academically, right? What do we do for behavior? Then write this referral to the office and buy. Have I done that? Yes. But now's the time to change that. Now's the time to look at the situation, look at our kids, look at their needs, and bring them where we need them to be. Take the time out to do it. And I know curriculum kills me, and they're going to probably, don't ever let her speak again. I know you have to have certain things done by this day, by this day, by this day. You have to cover this and this and this and this and this, and they have to be ready for the district benchmarks. They have to be ready for STAR. They have to be ready for this. They have to be ready for that. But guys, like she said, those kids don't care to learn from you if they don't know that you care. You can't honestly think that if you don't build relationships with these kids, that they're going to learn everything from you. They're not. They're gonna tune you out, and you're gonna be wah, 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 wah. Or you're gonna have those behaviors that destroy your classroom. You're gonna have those bad days. You're gonna be like, oh my God, I'm not going back. I've done it. I've said it. But we have to change it. And we have to be reflective in who we are and what we're doing on our campuses in order for that to change. I grew up in Fifth Ward, Houston, Texas. If you know what that is, it is Title I all the way, so socioeconomic. I was slated to be pregnant by 16 or selling drugs, 17, 18, jail somewhere, okay? I've never been on a plane. The furthest I've been is Louisiana, because that's where my mom's family's from. That was our trip, okay? We went to Galveston, you know, things like that. My first airplane ride was to Seoul, South Korea. Yeah, I was like, what? My culture was that of Fifth Ward. That's all I knew. I didn't know about the world. So when I left to live in Seoul, South Korea for a year, I was like, I'm gonna die. I'm not gonna make it back, because I'm starved. All I knew was McDonald's, Pizza Hut, I like Domino's sometimes, and maybe fried chicken every now and then, KFC. When I got there, I was like, I have to open up. I have to see what this is about. My first meal, when I got on the plane, I went straight to the school, and we had our own cook. She made me a kimchi egg omelet. Number one, when I looked up kimchi, I was like, I'm not gonna eat this. You gotta Google it, you know, is this okay? The best meal I had all year, every time I would go back to school, I was like, can you make me kimchi omelet? They embraced me. The kids did not know me. The kids thought that all Black people came from Africa. They were afraid the first day I walked in, like, they would step back and they would, you know, we had some regular Korean teachers there that was, you know, translating. And when they finally started to talk to me and get around me, I was like, guess what? I'm from Texas. Not the USA. I'm from Texas. And I was like, there's a whole bunch of us over there. So at that moment, that was an open door for me to teach them my culture, and also an open door for them to teach me theirs. We have to give our kids the opportunities to open that door and to be able to walk through it. That's where I'm going with the story. As much as I wanted to stay in my little shell and eat McDonald's, because McDonald's tastes the same everywhere. You know, I was gonna eat chicken nuggets the whole year. But I had to be open. And when I say those are some of the most fantastic foods ever, and I kept my shape. When I got back over here, I just messed it all up. But I was able to do that. I even joined a Taekwondo class with my kids, and they kicked my butt. But I tried to stay. So we have to be open to those experiences. I was super afraid, like first airplane ride, 16 hours, what is going on with you? But we have to be open. And that opened my eyes to now, I will try anything once. I won't try snakes, and I won't try lizards, okay? But I will try anything once. And that is the thing that I have to push into my kids. You are not limited because of where you are. Coming in from Chandler to Sci Fair, I was like, oh, it's Sci Fair. I don't have to worry about Title I school. I'm going to be the best school. The kids don't have everything. I am ready. I taught at Hopper. Title I. So, and even though I thought, okay, Sci Fair, they get to go places, they take vacations, My kids hadn't been to the Galleria. My kids had never, seen the real ocean. Not Galveston, I don't count that as the ocean. But they never had those experiences. So guess what I did? I went through everything I had, all my pictures, and every day, like a minute or so. Guys, look at this. Guys, look at that. I was fortunate enough to take a step out. I was fortunate enough to not stay in my house. So I wanted to show them. And now they were excited. Oh, you seen Panda? I saw a panda. I went to Beijing, I did this, I did that. The silk market, I ate a scorpion. I showed them all of this. And they were excited. You have to give them. You give them your culture. Share with them who you are. Share with them your family, your friends, your life. Because we imagine that they have all of this stuff at home. They're well taken care of, they're loved, they're cherished, they're hugged. But guess what? Some of them aren't. And this is the place that they get it. This is the place where they feel safe, they feel loved, they feel cared for. And you can be that one person that does it. And I'm uber happy right now because one of my first year kids just emailed me. She's 25, she has a 4-year-old. And she's like, I thought about you forever and I could not find you. And I'm so happy I found you. And when I tell you that, like, blew my heart away. Blew my heart away. You make a difference. You really, really do. You may not see it this year. That was in 2005 when I started teaching. It is 2018. And she still thought about what we did in that classroom. You matter. You matter. It may not seem like it, but you matter. What you do every single day touches somebody in some way. Your culture, their culture. Their culture is your culture. When they come in that classroom, when they come through the door, they're all of yours. Whether they come to, don't kill me if I say your name wrong, Mr. Purperton. If they go to Mr. Purperton's class, or if they go to Mr. Benjamin's class, or if they go to Ms. Dunn's class. You may see that same kid every day, but guess what? That kid also belongs to Ms. Jones. That kid also belongs to Mr. Thomas. They are all yours. Don't walk past them because they don't sit in your class. You smile and speak to everybody because they're all your kids. Bring that culture that you have for Joel and you spread it to each and every one of them. Because guess what? They're part of Joel. Okay? I'm sorry, I told y'all I'd get real passionate about this. I'm holding on.
I love having her passion with me and training. I love doing this together. Even in our department with our team, because we all come from different backgrounds. And that's what makes you who you are. But when we found this rings of culture is when it hit every one of us. Because as we mentioned earlier, a lot of times people say that it's just race. It's not just race. The culture that makes up who you are and the different rings, it's part of all 5 of these. It's your ethnic culture, your nationality, your religion, your gender, and your youth. And so as you think about each one of these, it takes all 5 to make up who you are and how you were raised and what you came from. So on this page, you're going to write, I am, and you're going to describe yourself from each ring of culture. So if I were to do this going through all 5 rings, I would say, I am a Caucasian American who was raised in a strong Christian home following the Mormon values. I am a female, and as a child, we played outside until the street lights came on every night. We drank from the water hose. That's who I am. Background, you can put a text screen up in there, so if you have a warm-up that you want to add, it can be on the board at all times. It also has a sound microphone that it can track how loud students are. So you set it to what level you want. It also has a stoplight. It doesn't change from the green to yellow to red, but you can do that, or you can, have a student go and touch your board. It has the timer, which, if you notice, that timer was a little bit loud because we have the volume loud, but it's better than the long bell that some of the timer tools have. It's just that, and I know a lot of teachers like it because they can go in after it dings once and say, okay, you've got 1 minute to switch groups or whatever, and you can very easily change it. And you can train students. Impression. Do you know how many encounters you have to change that? You have to have 20 good ones to erase that. So yeah, it's hard if we don't make a good first impression with our students and with those parents. It takes 20 additional good encounters to erase that bad first impression. So it matters. So think about you're a PBIS campus, and as you think about that, when we think of our triangle, the green is 80 to 90% of our kiddos are already doing what they need to be doing. The school-wide incentives and programs work for those 80 to 90%. Then we have those 10 to 15% in our yellow. And if you've ever heard me talk PBIS, I call the yellows our fence sitters. And you in your classroom decide whether they're going to swing and join the green, or if they're going to swing and join the red. And the red should only be the top 1 to 3 to maybe 5% of your class. And those kiddos are a specialized group. They're highly at risk. And those are the ones that most people and most of your specials in the school know, because they're working on plans and things for those kiddos. So when you think about that, and PBIS, where you spend your time, where your focus is, or where your target is going to determine where your yellow fence sitters swing. If you're truly growing your green and being positive by building those relationships and reinforcing those kiddos that are already doing what they need to be doing, your yellows are going to join your green, and then you're truly growing your green. But if you're focusing on that 1 to 3 to maybe 5% of red kiddos, your fence sitters see them getting your attention, and they're going to join the red. And then what happens? You start growing your red instead of your green. So think about that with relationship building and with PBIS. The focus of PBIS is to grow our green. If you're spending more time disciplining across the room or in front of their peers, you're red. You get, I heard someone say chaos, and then you're focusing on the red, and your red's going to grow. And then it does become chaos. Is that where we want to focus day in and day out? No. We want to focus on growing our green. So when you think of your matrices, these are just some samples. When you have that and it's in place and you're using the verbiage and you're relating it to PBIS, here's restorative in that same triangle. When you think of restorative and what we're talking about today and what we're rolling forth, 80 to 90% of your students, primary prevention helps. And with that green, if you look at the word right there, reaffirm what? Relationships. So with that 80 to 90%, you're just reaffirming those good relationships that you've already built. With our yellow, you are repairing those relationships. Those are those kids that might have left in the summer and they couldn't wait to get home because they hate school. Or they didn't feel that they were treated fairly last year. Or whatever their excuse. But a lot of times, Those are the kids that love school because they love your structure and they love knowing the routine of the day. They love knowing what's going to happen from 8 to 4. They love knowing that they're going to be fed lunch and probably breakfast too when they first get here. But with them, you have to repair broken relationships. Okay? Then if you look at our red, our top 3 to 5%, what do you have to do with those relationships? Rebuild. You have to start from the very bottom. Because those are the kids that are coming in that don't trust anyone in this school. So how do we break down those walls? How do we reach those parents? How do we go forward and let them know that we truly care and that we're here to show them just how much? Okay, you see how the triangle fits? You're already spending more time with those yellow and with those red, but you really have to work on the repairing and the rebuilding of those relationships, because truly, it takes both. It takes the praise and the reinforcement of PBIS, and it takes those relationship techniques of repairing and rebuilding, moving forward. But really, is it anything different than what you're already doing if you truly love your job and you're here for the right reasons? It's what we're already doing, right?
So before we get there, what is the first impression? A judgment. What else? What do you think about first impressions? They are important, right? They're thin. Think about it. You have, remember, real. So teaching, I had Jesse. Jesse was a tyrant. So in the school year, I know Jesse's going to such and such class, we go to Miss Jackson. Miss Jackson, guess what you do, Jesse? Jesse's a tyrant. He's gonna tear it up. Jesse also goes home, has cousins, friends in the neighborhood. You're gonna get Miss Caesar. She's a tyrant. So the same back and forth that we can do as teachers and colleagues to talk about these kids and say, hey, this was coming up, this is the impression, you know, you're building that impression for them. Those kids are doing the same thing. Those kids are going to say, hey, I had Miss Hollywood last year and she was phenomenal. Or, hey, I had Mr. Hollywood last year and he sucked. So regardless of how we feel and how we want them to come in, we have to build that first impression no matter what.
We must have replacement behaviors ready to respond and to be consistent. You know, a lot of times we focus on teaching our students replacement behaviors, but do we stop and think about what behaviors we need to replace or change? Because when they happen, there's two systems. There's our fast decisions that we have to make, those automatic snap judgments that we've already talked about. And then there's times when we can make slow decisions. We can think about it overnight. When you think about the number of decisions that you make in a day, did you know that we are in the top 3 jobs and careers in the number of decisions that we make in a day? We are only behind 2. Do you know what those 2 jobs are? Air traffic controllers usually rank first, and then trauma or operating ER doctors, surgeons are number 2. And we're behind that. I wouldn't want either of the other 2 jobs. Never. But teachers are right behind them. You know, think of those snap, quick decisions that we make all day long. You can have your lesson planned in your mind and have all of the decisions how that lesson's going to flow. But then we have to make snap judgment decisions very quickly throughout our day. And I'm like, wow, I would never want the job of an air traffic controller nor a surgeon. So think about that. But sometimes the decisions that we make have to be those quick ones. And we know that our biases control some of those snap decisions. If we know that, then we have to stop and think, what are the consequences of some of those decisions? And how can we take that, extra second or snap time to think about it and to go through?
Actually, we're table 2 plus 2 plus 1. Check out right here. Our article was over what is colorism. So 3 things we learned was not only teachers, but students also are biased. So they kind of have those biases already come into the classroom. Dark things, and it did say things in the article, but I'm sure it wasn't referring to people, it was just dark things in general. So dark things are devalued and light things are valued, and then colorism is global. 2 things that we want to share with you all are we all see color, but it's okay, and we are not different. And then one thing we wanted to implement was opening a conversation about race and differences, and for all of our kids to be proud of who they are and where they come from.
Okay, 3 things that we learned. Colorism is prevalent in countries as distant as Brazil and India. Some ethnicities face different expectations, different realities, and potentially different educational and economic outcomes. Society looks at light-skinned people as having an easier life. 2 things that we plan to share with our peers: provide students with language and explain the phenomenon they witness on a regular basis. Teachers may not be able to control what happens within their institutions, but they can facilitate critical conversations within their classrooms, so having those conversations in your classroom. And then one thing we are all committed to implementing, and we all literally wrote the same thing, it was pretty weird, create opportunities for students to interact with each other across multiple lines of identity.
The article we read was about a progressive plan, and we see that a lot when we are writing our IEPs. Maybe not writing them because we're not usually in on the writing, the SPED teachers do that, but we saw in this article that there is a positive effect on parent involvement, and that goes with any kids, whether they have an IEP or not. The more the parents are involved, the more positive the kids' outlook on being here and the performance they do in the classroom is definitely affected. But some of the things for the IEPs is there's language barriers that are between us and the parents, and so they don't really know how to communicate their wants or their expectations, and when we're telling them this is what's good for their child, they're going, okay, because they don't know how to communicate something else. And then we also need to form a bond between the parents and the resource teachers, because if they're in resource a lot, they may not see us very much, and so that relationship mainly is with resource teachers and parents. But as the general ed teachers, we also need to reach out to those parents and not just say, oh, hi, at the IEP meeting, and try to form some kind of relationship. And then the 2 things we wanted to share is that we needed to collaborate with the parents on the IEPs instead of saying, here, this is what we're doing for your child. We need to really ask them their input, because I don't think I've ever seen that where we ask them truly what do they want for their child. We know what they need and where they need to be, so these are the things that will hopefully get them there, but we don't really ask them to help us form that plan. And then the language of the IEPs is not written for parent friendly, and even general ed teachers sometimes we sit there and go, okay, whatever, because we don't really understand all those terms and letters and stuff. So it could be written in a more friendlier format so we can understand it. And then the one thing that I would like to, and I think our group kind of agreed on it, is that we need to ask the parents what their goal for their child is for the year, because it's probably different than what the state says it needs to be or the district says it needs to be. And if they only want their child to, you know, I just want them to come to school and love school. Well, that's a goal we need to be working on, whether it's written down formally or not. We need to know what they want. And then if it's something that they're, well, my kid's going to make straight A's. They've never made straight A's in their whole life. We need to let them know that that's a great way to be, but we're not going to get there this year. You know, maybe eventually, but right now, that's just too much. Let's try to get them to where they're doing something else. So sometimes their goals for their child aren't realistic and aren't going to match up at the end of the year, and therefore they're going to think that their child didn't have a successful year. So that's what we came up with. All right.
That kind of sells the whole thing, but let me give you some points. One of the ideas they had was that everybody agreed with, that they talked about, was the importance of asking for parental input. So when we're communicating with our parents, what do you think about the rules that we have? What do you think about the guidelines? What do you think about how we're working through the school year? Increasing communication isn't obvious, but within all of us, we're all saying we wish we were able to do that more, not just with notes. Notes are sometimes easier, but a phone call goes a lot further. But sometimes there's a barrier in language. Yes, we do our best with all of that. Better understanding of students' cultural background. This comes from communication as well and relationships. If we're building a relationship however we can, we're going to start learning their traditions, their ideas, what their culture, even though they might be from a semi-ethnic background, they're going to have different ways of doing things. I remember asking kids last year of what I assumed, very good, nice, they had the same ethnic background, and yet they had two different kind of traditions. So, the number 2 is 2 things you plan to share with the rest. Well, being flexible. So we see rules and guidelines as being a little bit more flexible, rather than being fair. Rather than saying everybody does the exact same thing, it's more about being fair. And for some people, they need a little more help than other people need. So fairness is the flexibility side. So yes, we have rules, and yes, we have ways of doing things, but some kids need a little bit more help. Actually, the same thing for parents too. So when there's parent-teacher conferences and they can't come at all, we do our best. I even read in the article that some corporations would allow the teachers to go to the workplaces of the parents. Interesting. I thought of doing that, especially if they're buying lunch. That's fun. Here's a good one. Love this just as a mantra: people over paperwork. People are so much more important, and paperwork is just paperwork. How can you identify a person on paperwork? People are so much more than the paperwork, and actually the whole thing we can say people are more important than all of this. The kids are, their parents are, their background is, what they believe, and their values and their belief systems, all of that is so much more important than this paperwork. Last thing, intentionally building relationships is what we really are trying to do. Really trying to commit ourselves to be more communicating with our parents and about their kids and what we're doing and what we can do as a team. If we're truly trying to do this thing you can't read, it's called collaboration between us and the parents, then it's a team effort between me as their surrogate parent and them as their actual parent. And together we're working on the goals for that child, what they're going to be doing together. Cool?
And people over paperwork thing, that like applying that to school,
Hold on, you can start over.
Oh, okay. That's really going beyond the Friday folder or the notes home. Like, because a lot you think, well, they know because I put it in the Friday folder. Okay. Also, is that their signature? That kind of thing. So, like, it's not just the note, it's the home visit if it's necessary. It's the phone calls, the inviting them to school, inviting them to the classroom. Come and sit with us. They don't even have to be a behavior call. Just be like, just come and enjoy a day with us, or an hour, 20 minutes. you know, whatever you can give. So that's, I just want to say that's all.
Let's give them a loop. Awesome.
All right, so our article was on 9 powerful practices. And after we discussed it, one of the things that we kind of learned, there's different levels of language, but we've never heard about it as the 5 levels of formality, where it talks about frozen language, like the Pledge of Allegiance, things that don't change. Formal language, like what you might use for a report or an important presentation. Consultative language, like what you would use at school as an educational or in a job context. Casual language between friends. And intimate language, the language you would only use with those you're closest with. So that was a new way for us to think about those levels of language. Also, the hidden rules that we have here at school are different than what might be acceptable in the home environment. Some of those things were, they talked about, were being reactive might be very appropriate in a home environment where they have to react quickly to certain things in their environment. But at school, we're taught to think first, speak, and then act, or a different strategy of things that might need to be taught. Nonverbal signals, something that we might think of, nonverbal signals are the key to communicating how you're feeling, so whether it's judgment or respect, we can communicate that non-verbally. And also, children are often unaware of how their nonverbal skills are communicated instead of just using their words. So things that we want to share, the different vocabulary that could be experienced at home versus that comes from home. We learned, I think, 3 times the amount of vocabulary, so like 3 million versus, or 30 million versus 10 million vocabulary words by elementary age for kids from a low socioeconomic group to high socioeconomic groups. You can see the disparity in vocabulary, how they're already at a disadvantage in a school setting. And then parent communications, very similar to some of the points that were made from the last article that was read. When a parent comes in and there's a group of professional teachers sitting across from them, how intimidating that is if the vocabulary is unfamiliar, whether it's special education or whether it's a math concept. That's something they have no experience with. It's intimidating, so that's something that we need to be aware of and sensitive to and help build those break down those communication barriers. And then something that we wanted to implement, I think we were all really struck by the different types of communication that there are and how to bridge the gap, help kids who maybe come in and they say, this sucks. Say, that's great, I see that you're really disappointed, but maybe give them a more constructive way. Because they have to learn those skills to be successful in the job environment and later for different reasons. So thank you.
Some of the same stuff. So 3 takeaways is respect, and that could go towards parents, students. It's as simple as greeting students, using smiles, nonverbal, verbal, just showing respect for something we relearn. Language and verbiage, so same kind of thing, so the levels of formality. So a lot of times we try to use a lot of the formal language, as we should be doing in a school environment, but also at times you can mix in that consulting language, helping teach the students to go from a casual, which is maybe the only thing they know, and trying to bring them over to the formal, which is a lot of reteach, a lot of modeling. And we talk about parent relationships because for most successful students, that's where it begins. Once you have the buy-in of the parents and you have their support, that's usually where you're going to have that. So we talked a lot about those parent relationships. The 2 things to share, we the same thing. So with the school versus home expectations, the students got to be taught that just because it's okay at home doesn't mean it's always going to be okay at school. And that may, again, be another thing you have to teach and model. Those are things that you have to pick up on. Why they're saying these things that they're saying, maybe because that's just the norm at home. So understanding that and kind of teaching them that. And then again, watching the nonverbal cues and using communication. I mean, it's one of the most telling signs of someone's true feelings and intent is their nonverbal language. I mean, you can say whatever you want to say, but if your body's saying a different message, and that's all they're going to see. And then the one thing we're going to try to do again is building the relationships with the parents and guardians and students. I mean, again, that's get to them early. Don't wait until something's an issue that came up earlier. Just get to those parents early and get them on board.
called To the White Parents of My Black Son's Friends. It was written by a white parent who fostered and adopted a black child. And so our 3 things that we learned is that the way we behave has implications beyond our intent. So, harassment, our behaviors we may not intend for them to be harassment, but they come off, they are. And teaching them to be colorblind is not helpful. So if we teach all of our kids that color doesn't matter and that, we're all that we should be colorblind, it doesn't help them when they become adults and they face those judgments. And just because you haven't seen obvious examples of racism in your own life doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. And then 2 things to share. We need to have those intentional and tough conversations with our kids. And racism and harassment exists in various forms. And then our one commitment was that we need to reflect on our students' differences.
That's the same argument. It's more of a personal narrative, really, from my perspective. So we talked about how we have to recognize that even though we don't want it to be, racism still exists. And like she mentioned, that we can't teach children that it doesn't matter because it does. And it brings up Amber's point earlier, how she knows that there are certain children that are going to face those difficulties later on in life, and we have to prepare them for that. Teach children how to be a witness. So, like with my son, I never have to have that tough conversation that she's having with her child, but I do need to teach my son what to do when it happens to someone else. And that it's a real safety issue, not teaching kids about racism because of interactions that we see all the time on the news, like when a child interacts with the police or something, and if they don't do it in a certain fashion because of the color of their skin, how things can escalate so quickly. 2 things that we wanted to share, that we do need to have those tough conversations with kids, especially in the classroom, because sometimes we have that tension that bubbles up anyway amongst kids. And just because you don't see racism doesn't mean it doesn't exist. One thing that we all agreed on strongly that we're committed to implementing with our students is to advocate for them, to be aware of what's happening with them, and to try and seek to understand other people's perspectives.
Here we go. If you have helped care for your siblings, please step forward. If you have ever went to sleep without eating, please step forward. If someone else paid for your college, not loans, please step back. If you ever relied on any type of public assistance, please step forward. If you have ever been racially profiled in any way, please step forward. If you were raised in a single-parent home, please step forward. If you were raised in affluence, high middle class, high class, please step back.